Hello once more, everybody. We have a quite challenging task, that is to try to present what we did during 3 years in a research and practical project within 30 minutes. My task will be now to try to present to you the rationality behind this project, and my colleague Maren Gag will present some results based namely on the illustrated by what happens in Hamburg. That is to say, we will have within these 30 minutes 2 presentations. What I will do now is just to tell you why did we did this research. That is the background, to give you some information about the background. And secondly, what exactly or how do we do it? That is the approach and the methodology. So, at first I will start with some preliminaries. With the EU Council Directive of 27th of January 2003, laying down the minimum standards for the reception of asylum seekers as well as of the promotion of access to education and participation in FET. At EU level, an important signal was sent to the member states regarding the reconnection of asylum seekers and refugees as subject of integration, regardless of whether they have a sure residence status or not. Refugees were even explicitly included in the Equal Community Initiative that ran from 2001 until 2007. This can be seen as the intention to fulfill the aim as formulated in this directive. Equal made it possible to experiment with new ways to fight against discrimination and inequalities across Europe, in the labor market in particular. For the first time in the history of the European Union, the group of asylum seekers had been explicitly considered in an employment program. Despite the success of this program, in particular in the European thematic group 5, that is the one focusing asylum seekers, praised alike by all the EU countries and the commissions, Equal as a participant-oriented program, that is to say, the one which designed its activities basically in all levels around the direct benefits of the participant, was not restarted after 2007. It thus remained an experimental program, much to the disadvantage of a transfer of the best practices that had been developed in the numerous model projects. Up to today, no systematic ex post evaluation on the sustainability of the Equal measures has been carried out to determine if the target group specific integration models devised and tested in the different development partnerships of the countries could be transferred into permanent structured integration measures. Neither have there been a post-study to follow up on the participants and on the effectiveness of their career development after Equal. In this context, the idea of this project, that is to say EduAsyl, was born. The project, thought was not supposed to evaluate the Equal program from the perspective outlined above. It rather aims at analyzing the results achieved by Equal with respect to the harmonization of reception standards as formulated by the EU Council Directive, and to the promotion of access to education and participation in employment and FET in the integration policies of the member states. Based on case studies in 4 European cities, the question of access to education and training programs, as well as to the labor market for refugees and asylum seekers, was examined, while also highlighting the conditions of the success of such measures. The project thus aims at investigating the question of in what way and under which legal, political, structural, and individual circumstances the vocational preparation of integration of this extremely disadvantaged group of migrants can be successful in Europe. What role can be ascribed to their biographies, which are characterized by transnational mobility, and thus to the specific competencies they bring with them in the process of vocational preparation and integration? So that were the questions we try to answer in the research project. And this question underlies some specific theoretical perspective that we thought to be useful while dealing with the target group. So the first one is the research approach. And this research approach concerns both the structures as well as the subjects. Research approach concerning the structures. Regarding the extremely difficult situation of asylum seekers and refugees in basically all EU member countries, refugee research has up to now primarily focused on the legal and social and structural mechanism of discrimination with respect to the integration in the receiving countries, as well as on individual deficits as a drawback. As a matter of consequence, most practical projects are deficit-oriented in their approach to integration, and the majority of the offers based on these approaches focuses on compensating the deficits asylum seekers may have, whether linguistic, mental, physical, cognitive, cultural, social, or material. The approach developed in this project, however, was firmly resource-oriented, both towards the integration structures and the target group. This perspective is based on the theoretical approach that the spatial distribution of what Bourdieu calls structural capital, that is the quantitative and qualitative availability of valuable infrastructure, institutions, and services, constitute one of the most important structuring dimensions of the social space. Due to the spatialization of the different forms of capital, economic, cultural, social, and symbolic capital, specific capital configurations are to be observed in urban quarters, resulting from the given local objective conditions, including housing conditions and the availability of jobs, social and healthcare services. It is this form of capital varying across social spaces, the material conditions which are unequal distributed, that conditions the residents' development potential and their scope of action, thus their acquiring ability, and that define their access to and control over education, vocational, and labor market resources. Based on this assumption, in all 4 cities, a comprehensive survey of the existing structural resources was conducted, focusing on faith-related institutions of integration. That is to say, institutions preparing for the labor market, while also addressing the question of accessibility and usefulness of these structural resources for refugees and asylum seekers when considering the specific needs and requirements of this target group. The second approach on resources focuses yet the refugees themselves. In our society's public discourses, asylum seekers are mainly labeled with negative, hence stigmatizing attributes such as criminal, sluggards, parasites, or illegitimate beneficiaries of social services. They are even viewed as victims by social and educational workers and other so-called mentors or helpers. Also due to the fact that their biography are usually characterized by several traumatic experiences, including their precarious situation in the receiving countries as a whole, refugees tend to be essentially regarded as helpless beings and victims. The project EduAsyl, however, took a different approach and assumes that they are due to the primarily socialization in different contexts of their countries of origin, as well as due to their transnational biographies and experiences of flight. Refugees and asylum seekers are equipped with various competencies acquired in the formal, non-formal, and informal education sector. Systematically considering these existing individual resources and competencies shall thus be the theoretical basis for examining the success of any kind of education, social, pedagogical, or social work, as well as labor market support program, which aims at reducing the individual effects of the structural disadvantages refugees faces. This contributes, among other things, to preventing the downgrading of refugees in the formal and non-formal education and faith system of the receiving European countries, which is usually the result of a wrong assessment of their qualifications and competencies, as well as the unnecessarily prolongation of the time this target group spends in the education system. In turn, the advantage of making use of the resources already available inter alia by including the qualification and competencies acquired in the countries of origin and during the flight in integration-related work are obvious. The transnational experience of flight under quite adverse conditions can thus be viewed as a biography resource, which may manifest itself in resilience, capability, regarding all the challenges which go together with the existing condition of a refugee in everyday life. Moreover, the capitalization of all learning experiences made by the refugees in the course of time in integration work also contribute to promoting lifelong learning for this target group, despite biographical breaks and disruption related to the flight. Focusing on the plurality of education places, formal and non-formal, or informal, which may serve as learning location before and during the flight, constitutes furthermore a contribution to life-wide learning. With this term, I would like to highlight the localization of education. That is to say, that place is fundamentally constitutive for educational content and for the competencies resulting from it. In this way, alongside the formal and non-formal sector, the informal sector as a place for education and thus for competence acquisition gains in significance. The combination of these three educational locations or sector is decisive in order to get a comprehensive overview of all the resources migrants bring with them in the context of their transnational biographies. FED researches has shown that the vocational integration of refugees and asylum seekers is most successful when their whole life situation is stabilized through appropriate intervention. While previously educational work focused on vocational qualification and training, assuming that this would create the conditions for social integration, today it is the stability in the individual life situation that is regarded as prerequisite for successful vocational integration. Thus, if the success of vocational support programs is to be evaluated, it is simply not enough to focus exclusively on the educational pathway and the employment biography of the participant. The successful completion of such educational programs, along with the possibility of entering training work, depends on the forms of handling the difficult life situations refugees have to face, their financial situation, their residence status, and of other law-related issues, the stability of their social relations, their civil competencies, their housing and health conditions, as well as the form of their recreational activities are significant dimensions that have an impact on the success of an educational support program. We thus assume that there is a close, albeit not causal, relation between the life situation of an individual and his or her possibility to ask for and to acquire education. In the research project, we define education as a product of individual possibility of access to and control over different forms of economic, social, and cultural capital. The life situation of an individual is determined by the specific quantity, that is to say the volume of the capital and the configuration of those various types of capital. Economic capital can directly be converted into money. Cultural capital manifested itself in certificates and educational degrees and may pay off in the form of a well-paid job. Social capital is made up of different types of useful social status of the individual. We can add the juridical capital, which will refer to the legal status. From this perspective, it can be shown that the educational and employment careers of refugees develop under quite adverse conditions since their access to capital is excessively restricted. Basically, no form of capital can be accessed without a restriction or is available without control. Their acquisition potential or the different types of capital, that is to say, their capacity to shape their education career and to realize their aims in life is in fact minimal. And in many cases, their specific capital configuration allow nothing more than to aim at individual self-realization under highly precarious conditions for years. The legal, physical, economic, and social capital available to them is insufficient to be able to act profitably in the fields of education, training, and employment. That some individuals are able, despite the most adverse conditions, to earn education degrees and to find employment deserves greatest respect. That others have resigned, who could blame them for it? Based on these theoretical perspectives, empirical data on the vocational integration of refugees have been collected and analyzed in the European cities of Glasgow, Gothenburg, Florens, and Hamburg. So the data were collected on two perspectives. The first one was the structural perspective, that is to say, we try to see what are the integration structure which are available in the cities, in the 4 cities. And the second one was to try to look at the efficiency of this structure or the way they function from the perspective of the target group. So we did interviews with refugees and to see how do they get into this structure, how does this structure, are they integrated in it, and if this structure take into account their biography, that is to say the resources they bring with them. So that was basically what we did, and the results of the research were put together, were bound into what we call city reports. And my colleague Maringak will try now, based on the example of Hamburg, to give you an illustration of one of these results. Thank you.